Hello, my name is Curtis Wolf, and I'm the site manager at the Kansas Wetlands Education Center, which is by Cheyenne Bottoms, which is only about 10 miles northeast of Great Bend, Kansas. Now, as part of my job, I go around and visit with a lot of groups and try to tell them about this incredible resource that we have here in the middle of Kansas. And in some ways, it's one of those things that we oftentimes take for granted, some of these places that we have right in our backyard. And I wonder how many of you actually know about Cheyenne Bottoms. And so we're going to spend a little time today talking about what Cheyenne Bottoms is, why it's such an important area to this part of the state and even beyond. And then we're going to really focus on some of the bird life that stops here, because that's the real special visitors that we get to Cheyenne Bottoms. And finally, we'll talk about the Kansas Wetlands Education Center, which is a great place to come to if you ever visit Cheyenne Bottoms. Now, Cheyenne Bottoms is actually considered to be the largest marsh on the interior of the United States. And most of us would have never guessed that we would have a resource like that in Kansas. But we do. We have a 41,000 acre basin here right in the middle of Kansas. And again, this is very unique habitat to no one would really think would be here in the center of a state that's quite arid most of the year. Now, we've got this large wetland here, but you know, there's probably some better uses to that land that we could actually see. But it is a very important place ecologically, if nothing else, for the bird life that stops here. Cheyenne Bottoms is really known for the birds that do stop in. And we get a lot of birds because of where we sit geographically on the North American Central Flyway. Now, what I mean by a flyway is if we look at a map of the United States, biologists have basically designated 4 of these bird highways. Now, birds, as they migrate north and south, they follow pretty particular paths. And there's basically 4 of these across the United States. There's one on the east coast, one down the Mississippi River Valley, one on the west coast, and then one here in the central part of the United States, which is where we're at. Now, Cheyenne Bottoms is just one location along this flyway that birds stop at. Some of these birds are actually spending their breeding seasons up in northern Canada, some of them even over in Siberia, and they might be heading all the way down to South America to spend their winters. And so Cheyenne Bottoms, right here in the middle of the Central Flyway, provides birds basically a stopover place. So we get a lot of birds here, but really a lot of these birds are only here for maybe a few weeks during that spring or fall migration. But it's a very critical stopover place for the birds to stop in, to rest, to eat, and put on some energy reserves just to make it to their next destination. So at this point, if you think about yourself being a bird migrating and migrating across the state of Kansas, put yourself in those shoes. You're on a many-mile migration, and you're a shorebird. You're a type of bird that has spent your whole life around shorelines and beaches. And so if you're flying across Kansas, this is kind of the view that you're going to get. Now, as you're flying over Kansas, most of Kansas is not the type of habitat you want. It's much too dry, and it's not providing the shorelines and beaches that you want. Now, there are some reservoirs, like up here at Wilson Lake and then Canopolis Lake, but again, those aren't exactly the type of habitats you're looking for. They're too deep. You're looking for large shorelines and relatively shallow water for you to spend your time in looking for food. And right here in the middle of the state is one of those places. Cheyenne Bottoms provides these birds one of the stopover locations that they can stop at and know that they've got resources that are there for them. Now, as I'm trying to explain this, especially to kids, I've come up with a little bit of an analogy to try to explain how this works for birds. And if you put yourself into a traveling mode, if you're traveling down the highway and you begin to get hungry and you're looking for a place to maybe stop and eat and rest, what are you looking for? Well, the marketing people kind of have it along the highways. They put up giant billboards. And so my analogy is that Cheyenne Bottoms is really like a giant billboard for birds as they stop by. And in fact, I say the Cheyenne Bottoms is really, it's like the Golden Arches. As you can see here, when we see the Golden Arches as we're traveling down the highway, we know exactly what that means. We know what resources are available to us. We can get a Big Mac, fries, and a Coke when we see those Golden Arches. And so birds, when they see Cheyenne Bottoms, it's kind of like that giant billboard. They know what resources are available to them. Now, I'm going to take this analogy just a step further and say that, as we travel, we have choices. We can stop at McDonald's, but we have other places that we can also stop. And birds are actually no different. Even as they're traveling through Kansas, they even have choices. They can stop at Cheyenne Bottoms, but we don't just have one nice wetland in this area. We actually have two. About 30 miles south of Cheyenne Bottoms is a whole nother wetland called Quivira National Wildlife Refuge, which is in Stafford County. And this wetland is a little bit different than Cheyenne Bottoms. It's owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is a salt marsh, but it also provides them a resource, even though it's a little bit different resource than what Cheyenne Bottoms is. And so my analogy is that if Cheyenne Bottoms is like the McDonald's, Quivira is basically like our Wendy's. We know that we can get a different resource at Wendy's than we can McDonald's, and like I said, birds are similar. They can get a different resource at Quivira than at Cheyenne Bottoms. And so that analogy works pretty well. We're going to really focus on Cheyenne Bottoms for this presentation, though, and we're going to give you guys a little bit closer picture here of what Cheyenne Bottoms looks like. So this map shows this basin of Cheyenne Bottoms, and this is that 41,000 acre basin that is basically through here, and it is nestled between the communities of Hoisington, Claflin, Ellenwood, and Great Bend. And at this point, you can see that there's some lines within the basin of Cheyenne Bottoms. And as we know, those lines do represent roads. And in fact, the state area of Cheyenne Bottoms, about 20,000 acres of the basin is operated and owned, managed by the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. This is the part of Cheyenne Bottoms that we call the Cheyenne Bottoms Wildlife Area. And if any of you guys have ever come to Cheyenne Bottoms and driven through, you know that that's the area that you've been in, is the state area. Now, the nice part of this is this road system, this dike system that the state put in back in the 1950s, is actually a nice way for us to access the wetlands. These dikes provide a road system that we can travel through the middle of the wetlands and get access to the various pools of Cheyenne Bottoms. But I want to emphasize that this is not the only part of Cheyenne Bottoms. Up here closer to the Hoisington area is about 8,000 acres that's owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy. And this is about 8,000 acres that is managed much differently than the state area. This is what we call the Cheyenne Bottoms Preserve. Now, if you're not familiar with the Nature Conservancy, they're a wonderful organization, considered to be the largest conservation organization in the world. And their basic mission is to preserve particular habitats. And they've done exactly that here at Cheyenne Bottoms. They began buying up land in the early 1990s. And with this land, they basically try to set it aside. They do some management of the land, and in their case, they use grazing, a rotational grazing system, to maximize the number of the different types of habitats that are available to plants and animals. Specifically, they really target shorebirds and grassland nesting birds on their property. So this property is much different. It's not nearly as much of a recreational have as much of a recreational component. So there's less access to the public, and it's really there to be preserved in a natural setting. Where I work is at the Kansas Wetlands Education Center, which is basically located on the southeast corner of the state property. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Another thing that I'd like to add to this map is a few years ago, some residents of Barton County got together and put together a proposal to establish a national scenic byway. And so this 77-mile route was established that starts west of Hoisington, brings visitors around Cheyenne Bottoms on Highway 4, brings them by the Wetlands Education Center, and provides a path to get down to Quivira. And this route, like all the byways, is a significant route and has some economic components to try to get people into the surrounding corridor communities. And so there's quite the economic component here. There's some nice advertising opportunities and some other resources that are available to the tourism aspect of this. And so the Wetlands and Wildlife National Scenic Byway is a very important aspect of both wetlands at this point. I want to get back to the birds, though. The birds are really what a lot of people come to Cheyenne Bottoms to see, and is a very interesting part of what we do here at Cheyenne Bottoms. Now, altogether, there's been over 350 birds that have been documented at Cheyenne Bottoms. Now, you're never going to be able to see all of those at one time, but at any particular season of the year, you can come in and actually see a pretty good portion of birds. And you can see by the numbers here that Cheyenne Bottoms is a significant stopover for birds that stop in. Now, again, most of the birds that stop here are ones that are pretty unique to Kansas. They're not ones you're going to see in your backyard at your bird feeder. These are shore birds for the most part, birds that have spent their lives around water and require water for where they're at. And so we're going to go through a list of some of the birds that you can see here, some of the interesting visitors that we have, and I think you'll be interested in to see some of the birds that you can see in Kansas at a place like Cheyenne Bottoms. So to start off with, we do get a lot of waterfowl here, and specifically we get a lot of ducks. This is a listing of about six or seven different species that can be found here, but overall we have about 18 species of waterfowl that you can see at Cheyenne Bottoms. Now, depending on the time of year that you come, you can see more or less ducks, and sometimes the ducks are very colorful, like in this picture, but if you come in the fall, a lot of the ducks are out of their breeding plumage and are a little bit more drab colored. But we can, there's various times of the year, we can hold 20 to 30, maybe even 50 to 100,000 ducks at one time at Cheyenne Bottoms. And so they're an interesting group that can be seen here. We also get a lot of geese that stop in at Cheyenne Bottoms. Specifically, there's three species that are very common. The Canada goose, which most people are familiar with. The white snow geese, we can get very large numbers of. And then there's also greater white-fronted geese that stop here as well. Most of the time, we get the majority of the geese in the winter time, but scenes like this one in this upper left-hand picture are very common around Cheyenne Bottoms. It's not uncommon during the peak of the goose season for us to hold 200,000 to 300,000 geese at Cheyenne Bottoms. And so scenes like this, where there's swarms of geese on surrounding fields, is actually quite common. We also have a lot of the more typical wetland species, like these wading birds. American avocets and black-necked stilts and white-faced ibis are three species that stay here throughout the summer. They do migrate out of the area during the winter times, but they'll be here during the summer, and some of them do breed here as well. These are three of my favorite species. The American avocet is actually the logo bird for the Education Center, one of the more pretty birds that you can see when it has that breeding plumage. But all three of these species are perfectly designed to walk around in the shallow water with the long legs. They have long bills that they use to gather food, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. But three interesting wading bird species that are very typical wetland species that we see. These are the herons and egrets are another group of bird that we see commonly in the wetlands. We have three egret species, snowy egrets, great egrets, and cattle egrets, which are all very common during the summer and through the fall. And great blue herons are a species that we actually see throughout the year. And they are very common in many water bodies, but they are very much at home in our wetlands. We also get a lot of shorebirds that visit Cheyenne Bottoms, and for the people that like to see birds, this is the group of birds that they usually come to Cheyenne Bottoms to see. Things like plovers, sandpipers, and a group of birds that we call peeps. And these are very interesting birds. Killdeer is a bird that many of you might be familiar with. You see them in pastures, but they actually are a shorebird. They're a type of plover. And one thing that's interesting about killdeer is if you've ever seen them with a nest around. We typically have some killdeer that nest near the parking lot of the Wetlands Education Center, and it's not uncommon for us to be able to show kids or other people how they act when they have a nest around. I've got a video here of a killdeer that has built a nest near near the Wetlands Education Center, and you're going to see how it kind of reacts when we come close to it. Now, when a killdeer makes a nest, it's a very simple nest in a shallow depression, just kind of out in the open. It's very susceptible, or looks very susceptible, to predators. And so, as the killdeer has developed several different tactics to try to scare away predators or to detract them from their nest. This video shows a mama killdeer, and the nest is here right there in the picture with a young one there. And you can hear mama killdeer making a lot of noise trying to scare me off, but when that doesn't work, she goes to a different tactic, which is a broken wing impression. And so she flops around on the ground trying to distract the predator away from her nest towards her. And as a possible predator looking for a meal, I'm going to go towards that, which looks like an easy meal. But as you can see, as I get closer, she pops up and runs off a little further, and oftentimes will do that broken wing impression again. But in doing so, that's basically detracting me, the predator, away from her nest. Another species of sandpiper that we get here is called a long-billed dowitcher, and they can be quite numerous at times. And here's a little video of dowitchers, and this is typically how you see them when they're here at Cheyenne Bottoms. They have that nose in the dirt or in the mud for much of the time that they're here. Some people even call them sewing machine birds, just because that's kind of what they look like as they're feeding. Now, the typical question, or the question that we get from that is, well, what are they eating? And the actual answer to that is, if I can bring it up, this is one of the main food sources of many of the birds that stop here. This is a midgefly larvae, also called the bloodworm. Now, bloodworms are just the larval form of this insect up here, which is the actual adult midgefly. And the life cycle of these is that basically the midgefly adults fly around and breed and lay eggs on the water. The eggs sink down into the muck and mud of Cheyenne Bottoms and hatch out into this red worm-looking larval form. The bloodworm lives in the muck and mud of Cheyenne Bottoms and is a great food source for many of the birds that stop through, along with a lot of other macroinvertebrates that are in the wetlands themselves. And eventually these larval forms hatch out, kind of like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, and complete the life cycle by turning back into that adult form. Several other species of sandpipers that we get, like this least sandpiper in the bottom left-hand corner. There's about 15 different species of sandpipers that we get here. They all are very tough to tell apart. You have to look for pretty minute characteristics to tell them apart, but they're ones that the bird watchers really like to come and see. Some of these sandpipers are also some of the longest distant migrants that we have that come through this area. As I mentioned earlier, some of these have their breeding grounds in the northern part of Canada and even some over into Siberia. And a lot of these will overwinter down in places like Argentina. And so they're going on these large migrations twice a year. That's pretty good for a bird that's only about 4 inches long. Another shorebird that we get frequently here is called the Wilson's phalarope, and I bring them up just because they're an interesting bird to watch in their behavior as well. Typically, we'll have pretty large groups of phalaropes, as we see in that photo on the left, and they're a very interesting bird. And when you see phalaropes, you typically know what they are because of what they do. Here's a video of phalaropes in their typical form, and this will clear up in just a second, but when you see them out there, they're usually spinning. And they spin as their feeding method. If you remember, they're in shallow water, and as they spin, it's like creating a little tornado, bringing little particles and insects up off the bottom, and you see them pecking at the water, just picking up the pieces, basically. And so that's a very interesting thing to be able to see, and a lot of people have never realized that those phalaropes exist and that they behave that way. So it's fun to be able to show people that when they're here during the spring and fall. Another bird that we get asked about a lot are cranes, and we have two different types of cranes that visit Cheyenne Bottoms. And one of the more interesting ones is the whooping crane. The whooping crane, if you're familiar with their history, are probably considered to be the most endangered bird in North America. If you go back to the 1940s, there were only 16 whooping cranes left in the world. And because of protection measures and breeding programs, there's about 300 of these birds within the natural flyway right now, within the Central Flyway. And they typically, we have a few that stop at Cheyenne Bottoms and Quivira each fall and spring. This is a neat bird to see. It's considered the largest bird in North America. It stands about 5 foot tall, has a 7-foot wingspan. As you can see, they're bright white, just a magnificent bird to see. And this is one that when we do get them here at Cheyenne Bottoms, many of the birders will travel long distances just to come and see them. Now, the whooping cranes do breed way in northern Canada as well at a place called Wood Buffalo National Park. And as they migrate south, they follow the Central Flyway path right through central Kansas and stop at our wetlands on their way down to their overwintering grounds near Aransas National Wildlife Refuge down by Corpus Christi, Texas. And it's an interesting flyway, interesting path that they take, and again, an interesting bird to see here at our wetlands. Their close cousin, the sandhill crane, is also one of people's favorites. They're much more numerous, and we get quite a few of these that stop through this area on their migration. And again, as you hear them, I love hearing the sound in the springtime, because I know after we've had a long winter, we get to March and maybe even February, and you start hearing that sound, and you know that spring is right around the corner. And that's just a nice sound to hear. Another bird that is one of our favorites is, but one that is very difficult to see sometimes, is called an American bittern. And again, this is a very secretive bird. It's not one that you oftentimes see out and about, but you sometimes have a good chance of hearing them. And one interesting thing about them is that they will respond very well if you play a recording of their sound. Now, their sound that they make, the call they make, does not sound like any other bird that you've ever heard. But I'm going to play a video here that shows a little experience from the Fort Hays State University ornithology class a few years ago. And they were out here at Cheyenne Bottoms and got an interesting view of an American bittern that was out. And you'll hear, the first sound you'll hear is the recording that the class is playing, and then you'll see how the American bittern responds. So again, that sound you're hearing is the recording being played as they see an American bittern, and you see that it recognizes that voice, and again, then eventually comes in and try to get closer to the group. And now you can see the bittern making the call. And getting a little bit better vantage point of where that sound is coming. So again, just one of the many sights that you can see, one of the interesting birds that you can see here in our wetlands, and just something that a lot of people take for granted and don't realize that it is available to them right here in their backyards. And speaking of that, there are many other wildlife that can be seen at Cheyenne Bottoms. It's worthy to come out and see them, to study them, and just to enjoy their presence here. It's not uncommon to see deer and turtles and other plants, snakes, insects. All of those can be quite interesting in the wetlands here, and unique to Kansas anyway. So another unique part of what Cheyenne Bottoms is the people that come here. We get visitors from all over that are coming here for various reasons. Bird watchers is definitely one of the hobbies and that brings people in to Cheyenne Bottoms because of all the birds that are here. But that's not the only use of Cheyenne Bottoms. Hunting is also a big deal. There are about 13,000 acres of public access hunting in the state area, and hunting, especially waterfowl hunting, is a major use. We get families and children here, school groups that come in all the time, and it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to show them this natural setting of the wetlands. We also get researchers. We have 4 graduate students from Fort Hays State University that work at the Wetlands Education Center, and they're doing research on wetlands oftentimes. And so we get those researchers here as well as other researchers that come to Cheyenne Bottoms to study various aspects. Photography has become a much more popular use of Cheyenne Bottoms as well. We'll get photographers that come from all over the United States to be able to get bird pictures or landscape pictures, which is very neat. And then just tourists in general. We get a lot of people that are just traveling down the highway and see this landmark, and whether it's on the byway or just coming to visit the education center, we get lots of travelers that just come through the area. So that brings me to the Kansas Wetlands Education Center. Now, the Wetlands Education Center was opened in April of 2009 and has been basically a presence here at Cheyenne Bottoms for since then. It provides people a place to come and learn a little bit about the area and about the wetland resource that we have at Cheyenne Bottoms. Now, the center is owned and operated by Fort Hays State University, and so most of the employees that work here are Fort Hays employees. However, we have two employees that are stationed out of the center that are Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism employees as well. The center is basically here, and our mission is to educate people about wetland communities, why they're important, and why it's important to conserve and restore habitats like this. And so we do this through many different aspects. We have exhibits. We do a lot of programs with kids, with adults, and various other public programs. And then we have a lot of events as well. So we have several different aspects to the Kansas Wetlands Education Center that you can come and visit. One thing to come and see and do is in our Koch Wetlands Exhibit Gallery. The Koch Foundation supplied funding to basically fill a nice exhibit hall with various exhibits that tell the story about Cheyenne Bottoms. We talk about what wetlands are, why they're important, and then the animals and plants that you can find there. And so it gives people a little bit of a snapshot of what they can do when they visit Cheyenne Bottoms. We also have a great auditorium. The auditorium we use for programs, for presentations, for classroom programs that we do as well, and it's just a nice area. Another thing that we have is about a 15-minute video that we put on for visitors when they come in the door that gives a nice little introduction to what Cheyenne Bottoms is. We also have a great classroom facility. The classroom we also use for programs, but it's also turned into our live animal exhibit. When people come to visit the Wetlands Education Center, if we don't have a program going on, we allow them to go back and visit the about 30 different species of animals that we have there that we also use for programs. But we get a lot of school children here, and we get them out into the wetlands and looking for various organisms and getting them out into nature. We also have a great gift store. Our gift store has a lot of different items for souvenirs from Cheyenne Bottoms. We sell a lot of field guides to help people identify what wildlife they're looking at. We also have a lot of local artwork that we sell through the gift store. Several local artists have pieces that we sell on consignment, and that actually turns into kind of another exhibit as well for us at the Education Center, but a great gift store. We also have a nature trail that extends out into a wooded area near the Education Center and then back along the wetland itself. It's about a half-mile loop that people can walk and see some sights near the Education Center. We also use it a lot for school programs, for nature hikes. It works very well. We do a lot of tours. We actually have a van that we will take people out into the wetlands and give a little bit of an interpretive tour about Cheyenne Bottoms and help people identify some of the birds and wildlife that they see as they go through the wetlands. We offer other tours like prairie chicken viewing and crane viewing, and we also actually do a big birding festival called the Wings and Wetlands Birding Festival every other year. And this is one one of the things we really focus on is getting people out doing tours of Cheyenne Bottoms and Quivira, and that's really the focus of the Wings and Wetlands Festival. So in closing, I would like to thank you for listening to this presentation about Cheyenne Bottoms, and I encourage you to come visit us. Make plans to come to the Education Center and get a rundown of what's going on here, and then make a trip out to Cheyenne Bottoms to see it for yourself. You can see our hours of operation. We're open 7 days a week during most of the year, Monday through Saturday 9 to 5, Sundays 1 to 5. We are closed on Mondays during the winter months from November through March. You can see our phone number and our website. You're welcome to call us or visit the website to learn more about the programs we offer. And we list all of the upcoming programs that we're having on our wetlands. If you're interested, we can also put you onto an e-newsletter list. We send out an e-newsletter about once a month, and it's a great way of keeping up on all the programs. One other thing that I will mention is that if you come visit us, the center is all free. There's no admission price to come in, and most of the programs that we offer are also free. So we really encourage you to come make a visit to Cheyenne Bottoms and see us. And I want to thank you guys again for listening to this presentation. I hope that you've learned a little bit about what the Wetland Center is and why Cheyenne Bottoms is such an interesting and unique place for the state of Kansas. So I thank you, and I hope that we see you soon at the Kansas Wetlands Education Center. Thank you.